my name is Ryan Cam, and welcome to the official end of the 1999 project, my 1999 best of, worst of, and my over-under. Now, this video is going to be my list of my favorite movies from 99, my least favorite movies of 99, and a selection of movies that I find to either be overlooked or underrated. Now, let me just get out in front of this and just say that this video is not going to be a top 10 or top 20 list. This is not going to be a ranking video. I do have a favorite and a least favorite movie from this year, and I just decided that I'm not going to rank these movies any further than that. I love slash hate these movies for a variety of reasons, and 99 was such a year that if the movie's good, it's really good, and when it's bad, it's really bad. There's a string of good ones in there too, and a couple of very forgettable ones, and some forgettable ones just in general. But this video is not going to be a ranking video. Like I said, I have a favorite, I have a least favorite, but this is not going to be a top 20 or top 10 video. That being said, though, let's get into the best of. And when I heard that 1999 was one of the greatest years for film of all time, I was like, okay, I'll have to see that for myself. And I haven't seen every year of film in my life, one day, but the claims were not over exaggerated. Every single month, there just seemed to be one genuine treasure after another. This year is bursting at the gills with gems large and small. Like movies you would never think in a million years would be great turned out to be outstanding, and then the Stone Cold classics largely still hold up to this day. So with that being said, though, let's get into it. Starting things off, here is my absolute favorite movie of 1999. It is
The Iron Giant.
heavily biased pick, but The Iron Giant is not only one of my favorite animated movies, it's one of my favorite movies, period. If I was making a top 5 or 10, it would easily be in the top 5 conversation. It's a movie that never gets old for me. No matter how old I get, no matter how many years pass, it's one of those movies that I just turn on, I watch, and I'm just like, all the positive memories just flood back into me. I'm willing to entertain the conversation that there are objectively better made movies in 1999, but in terms of highly subjective list, which this is my absolute favorite. The part where the Iron Giant sacrifices himself, he goes Superman, just nearly makes me cry every single time. So if somehow you've never seen the Iron Giant, that's your homework assignment. Go and see it. But with that being said, though, here are the other movies on my favorite movies of 99 list. And this is in no particular order. This is not ranked from best to worst like I talked about. This is just a list of movies that I love for one reason or another. Starting off with The Insider. And I was thinking going into this is going to be a bit of a bore, but the real draw of this movie is seeing a man destroy his own life for the sake of the perceived greater good. You see that with Russell Crowe's character, and then you end up seeing that sort of kinda with Al Pacino's character, trying to help Russell Crowe's character in any way that he can while trying to please CBS and also try to keep his job in the process, and slowly losing faith in the very thing that he has built his career on. The last 20 minutes of the movie, 20 minutes to a half an hour, some of my favorite movie-related things that I've seen in this entire 99 project. Next up is The Straight Story. Now, this is directed by David Lynch, and by all accounts, this is his most normal movie, but I loved this movie. I gave it a great rating initially, but the more I thought about it, the better it got in my head, because of how simple it is. It's about a man trying to go see his brother for a final time because they're both old and they're not going to be around forever. And so Alvin Straight decides that he's going to see his brother one more time and bury the hatchet once and for all. This could have easily been boring or botched in a whole lot of ways. This might have my favorite ending of any movie I watched for 99, where it's just Alvin and his brother sitting there and just not really having it out, not really having a conversation. It just Jeffrey Dean standing going, "You drove all this way just to see me." Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful stuff right there. Next up is Stir of Echoes. If this movie had come out in literally any other year, it would be among my favorites, like even still. But the movie's only real crime is that it came out the same year that The Sixth Sense came out. More on that in a little bit. But considering that The Sixth Sense and Stir of Echoes are eerily similar in terms of their premises, it takes a lot for the quality of the film to show that it's not as good as The Sixth Sense, but it is debatable if it's on the same level in terms of ghost stories go. Stir of Echoes is way better than it's given credit for. Speaking of The Sixth Sense, next up is The Sixth Sense. It's The Sixth Sense. It's the reason why M. Night Shyamalan still has work to this very day, and pretty much the reason why I will give anything that he does a fighting chance. And Shyamalan has done good movies after this, Unbreakable, The Visit, among other things. He's had a lot of duds too, which have been very well publicized. But he has The Sixth Sense, and that's a movie that just has aged like a fine wine. And this has some of the finest work of Toni Collette's entire career. Next up, and probably the one that I did not expect to love but ended up loving, American Pie. And this is a movie that has a rather sizable following. That doesn't change the fact, though, that it's a really good movie, and it really comes down to it's a simple premise. These high schoolers are trying to get laid, and just the odyssey that they all go through in order to get there. I In another world, I probably would have hated this movie, and if in the hands of lesser people, this would have sucked. But thankfully, it was actually quite enjoyable. Speaking of movies I didn't think I'd love, but I turned out I really loved, it's Notting Hill. Talk about a movie that I was like, okay, this seems decent, and then just falling in love with. Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts are just endlessly charming with each other. It's a great story, and you just really want these people to make it out, and they actually do. Huzzah. Next up is The Mummy, and this is a movie that I had not seen in a very long time, and just I had the biggest, dumbest grin on my face when I was watching this because the movie is a big, dumb summer action film. It knows exactly what it is, and it's about as close to an Uncharted movie that we'll probably ever get. And I don't hate the Uncharted movie we actually got, but I mean, Rick O'Connell's basically Nathan Drake with a name change. That's pretty much it. Anyway, see The Mummy. It's awesome. Next up is Galaxy Quest, and this movie strikes a very nice balance between being unironically awesome as a sci-fi story while also lovingly poking fun at Star Trek and Star Trek fans and the convention culture that we see today. It could have so easily been cringe in either direction, but the movie pulled it off. And in any respect, it is one of the very finest like sci-fi comedies ever made. Next up is Magnolia, a 3-hour movie in which Paul Thomas Anderson hires all of his friends to tell separate but yet interconnected stories with each other, and by some miracle it all works. But Tom Cruise easily steals the show on this one. He had a secretly fantastic 99 between this and Eyes Wide Shut, which just barely made it on off of the list. Not by much, though. But Tom Cruise just crushes it here, and honestly, the rest of this cast absolutely crushes it as well. It is a long movie at 3 hours and some change, but see this movie if you have not. Speaking of long movies, next up is The Green Mile, and Frank Darabont needs to come back to directing. Like between Shawshank, this, and The Mist, like Frank Darabont is secretly really good at being a director, and I don't know if he's retired or not, but someone needs to coax him into bringing him back to the director's chair because he absolutely rocks. And it does not and it absolutely helps that he just understands Stephen King's material better than most. Green Mile is not Shawshank Redemption good, but it's still outstanding. And Michael Clark Duncan absolutely got robbed at the Oscars. You picked the wrong Michael Academy. Next up, and here's the hard left, is Toy Story 2. I have said it before and I will say it again. It's the best thing Pixar has ever done, and nothing that I have seen has changed my mind on that front. Toy Story 2 is just fantastic. Go and see it. Sticking in the world of animation, next up is Princess Mononoke. And this is not my favorite Ghibli film. That is still Spirited Away because I'm basic like that. But this movie is still epic and make no mistake. Like, Hayao Miyazaki is just once in a generation. We'll never see another like him. We just won't. Next up, well, time to break the rule and talk about Fight Club. Now, Fight Club was a movie that did not do all that well at the box office when it was initially released, but it has had such an impact on the world in general that when you go to review it on Letterboxd, a message will pop up saying you're about to break the first rule and talk about Fight Club. That's that is like that's that is something when like a movie review website saying you're about to break the rule. Initially talking about the stone has been rejected has now become the cornerstone. Doesn't change the fact that Fight Club has just aged like a fine wine in a lot of its aspects. Next up, and this is the last animated movie on my list, is Tarzan. And this is a childhood favorite of mine, and Tarzan just absolutely crushes. From the beautiful animation to Phil Collins's outstanding soundtrack to Clayton's death, Disney's Renaissance was about to come to an end, sadly, but they went out on one hell of a high. Next up is The Matrix. It is The Matrix. Next up is 10 Things I Hate About You, and this is one of the only high school movies that I loved when covering the 99 Project. There was a slew of 99 like high school movies this year, and I hated most of them. 10 Things I Hate About You was one of the lone exceptions in that the characters were actually charming. There's a good story here, and I think I've seen the ending where Julia Stiles does the poem at the end about 10,000 times. I love the finale of this. It is a thing of beauty. You are missed every day, Heath Ledger. Next up is Office Space. If you have ever had a crappy job, Office Space is the movie for you. And this is a movie that just, and I won't get into it here, but it rings pretty true, a lot of it still to this day. Like, Mike Judge is secretly like really funny between this and King of the Hill. Like he just absolutely knows what he's doing. And someone please get this man his stapler. Like that's all he wants. And finally, wrapping up the best of is October Sky. And this is a movie that I saw very early on, like when I was a lot younger in science class. And it's a movie that has stayed with me to this very day. I almost made it my number one. That turned out to be The Iron Giant. But October Sky is just a beautiful biopic. It's an awesome coming of age story. Jake Gyllenhaal's career, while I imagine he did star in other things before this, this is the thing that pretty much launched him from what I saw. It was this, and then it was Donnie Darko, and the rest is history. October Sky is a beautiful film with one of my favorite endings of all time, in which Chris Cooper, after the whole movie of just being the kind of dick father, puts his arm around his son and just admires at his son's accomplishment. It's a thing of beauty, it really is. But now we go from the best to the worst, and let's talk about the worst movies of 1999. And I'm thankful to say that this was a pretty easy one to choose because most of the movies I watched this year were at the very least good. So when the bad movies showed up, it's like, oh, that's clearly one of the bad ones. So they were pretty easy to spot. Well, let's kick things off though with my absolute worst, my least favorite movie of 1999, Baby Geniuses. I mean, just this thing is just awful. Like, and I don't think I can really talk about how bad it is. I mean, Nostalgia Critic pretty much covered everything that is wrong with it. All that I will say is that it's cringe, it's terrible, the CGI has aged like milk, and Christopher Lloyd said yes to this. Next up is Never Been Kissed. This is part of the whole slew of high school films that just were a plague on this year. And while most of them were pretty just mediocre. This was like the bad kind of bad. Like I hated everything about this, from John C. Riley being just a terrible news editor and yelling at de just yelling at this poor woman played by Drew Barrymore to Drew Barrymore as an adult trying to pass her off as a high schooler. If this is a commentary on how like high schoolers in TV shows are played by 20-year-olds, then fine, but I don't think the movie was smart enough to do that. So this was just a pain to sit through. Up is Goodbye Lover. You remember this one? Lord knows I didn't until I saw pictures of it and I'm like, oh, it's this one, where basically it's like a pseudo noir slash detective story with Ellen DeGeneres trying to play this hard-boiled detective. And Ellen DeGeneres is not a good person for a lot of reasons, but this was just bad by all accounts. Next up is Inspector Gadget, and I'm sure that there are others in this space who will put Inspector Gadget as their number one. At least in the grand scheme, it's bad, but it's like not the boring kind of bad like Baby Geniuses is. At least it is like boring and then bad, punctuated by the what the hell was even that? That's why it's not my number one. Doesn't help the fact that the movie is just genuinely awful. Next up is a movie quite simply known as Dick, where it ponders a future in which President Nixon was influencing Watergate and Deep Throat was not instead a man, but played by two young high school girls. Just terrible. Next up is Love Stinks, where a couple who clearly hate each other try to one up each other, including assaulting a cat. By that alone, this deserves to be on the worst of list. Next up is The Nuttiest Nutcracker, which just goes to show that the Nutcracker should just be retired from media and just like not be adapted in any way except for a ballet and literally nothing else. Because between this and the Nutcracker 3D, just no. Like the Nutcracker just needs to be left alone. And to close things out, we have a 1-2 punch of Hollywood doesn't understand. First up, Hollywood doesn't understand autism with Molly. This thing was a big old chore to sit through and just is so bad. Like it just like so bad. Like my whole body just began to cringe at some of the treatment of autism that just was just plagued throughout. Poor Aaron Eckhart, he deserved better. And to close things off, Hollywood doesn't understand the gay community with Three to Tango. And this thing was just awful. Like Nev Campbell just gave the look of, please, like Scream 3 can't come fast enough. But that's the end of my worst of. If you saw any of these, I feel so sorry for you. Now let's go to my over-under. Now, these are a selection of movies that I think are either overlooked or underrated and you should definitely check out. I'm starting off with the overlooked section, and this is a selection of movies that I think are really great, but people have just forgotten about and should definitely be taken a look at. Starting off the list, I'm going with the Jack Bull, and I've talked about the Jack Bull a lot in the 99 Project, and it's still awesome. Like the Johns of Cusack and Goodman alone should be a reason enough to go check this out for yourself. It's on Max. Thank me later. Next up is introducing Dorothy Dandridge, a pretty good little biopic starring Halle Berry. I believe she ended up winning a Golden Globe for this, and rightfully so because she absolutely nails it. Next up is Run Lola Run, and this was a movie that I did not expect much from, and I ended up loving because the movie is just drastically simple. It's about a young woman who has to save her boyfriend by running, like running to stop him from causing a devastating robbery. It's a fantastic little movie and I'd recommend it highly. Up is RKO 281, and because of the existence of Mank, this movie is probably going to fall under the radar for some, but definitely check out RKO 281. I'm sure there is enough juice left to squeeze for a definitive Citizen Kane biopic, but for now, I'll take RKO 281 because it was very well made and very insightful. And to wrap up the overlooked section, I'm going with Blast from the Past because Brendan Fraser had a secretly awesome 1999 between The Mummy and now this. And this barely missed my top 20, but that doesn't change the fact that this was a very charming movie about a man who has been living in a bomb shelter since the 50s and has come out in the 90s and all of the comedic possibilities that happened there. It's it's really funny stuff. You all should check it out. Now, next up, it's time for my underrated, and these are movies that I personally love, but others maybe not so much. These are movies that I really enjoyed, but there are others that are like, I'm not so sure. These are ones that I recommend giving a second chance to. First up is American Movie, and this is one that I did not expect too much from, but I ended up loving because it's a story about a man who just wants to make movies. That is his passion, that is his goal, and he pretty much gives up everything to achieve that. The movie also does a good job of showing that he's not a perfect person. He has problems. He does some pretty questionable things, but he justifies it to the best of his own ability, and I think that was pretty admirable. Like, see this movie for yourself. Like, you won't be sorry. Next up is Varsity Blues, and this is one that I personally just loved. It could have easily been a dumb football movie, but they actually give a lot of story to it, and most of the performances are fantastic from James Van Der Beek, Jon Voight, and a pre-Fast and Furious Paul Walker. So you should definitely check that one out. Next up is The Christmas Carol starring Patrick Stewart, and this is one that kind of grew on me because I love The Christmas Carol, just as a general story. And the Alistair Sim one is my absolute favorite. But the Patrick Stewart one is definitely a close second because Patrick Stewart brought a lot of nuance and layers to the role that very few have brought to Scrooge. He does more with Scrooge than what most would do. And the very end just almost made me cry again, where he's like, "Can you please forgive an old man who just doesn't want to be cold anymore?" Right there, folks. Next up is Lake Placid. This movie's not even 90 minutes long. It is a monster movie in like the highest degree. And it is exactly what you think it is. It's about a group of people fighting a giant crocodile. This could have been so bad, but it was so enjoyable. I can't recommend that one enough. And finally, to wrap things up for underrated, I'm going with Mystery Men. If this movie had come out in 2017 or 18, it would be put on a pedestal, like seen as one of the best of the comic book movie genre. The movie's only real crime is that it was ahead of its time. It pokes fun and lampoons like superhero movies in a time before the MCU. Like this movie came out in between Blade and X-Men. That was a bad decision because if it had come out, say, in 2016, 17, 18, it would have just been lauded and praised to the nines. See this movie if you have not, especially if you're tired of superhero movies lately. But now, the 99 Project is officially over. Put it to bed. What did you think of any of the movies I've talked about? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.